Hey, welcome back. It's Chris Nichols here with PetaPixel. You know, it's been 2 years since Canon released the EOS R3, and we feel the R1 has got to be just over the horizon. Jordan and I are going to talk about what we want to see happen with the Canon EOS R1. Before we get started, I want to introduce you to the brand new Chronicle by ProMaster. This is a tripod that lets you tell the story wherever it happens to take you. So ProMaster has reimagined the tripod from the ground up. This has got an Arca Swiss compatible ball head, and it goes from camera to phone mode in seconds. Now the Chronicle has a center column with an integrated 3-leg base, and this lets you rapidly change between handheld stabilizer, tabletop tripod, or monopod. With seamlessly integrated design, the Chronicle really becomes an extension of your creativity, and this is going to be exclusively available on a Kickstarter campaign soon. So click the link in the description below. That way you can back this project, be one of the first to access an exciting new tripod that really unleashes your creativity. Okay, so what we really want to do is kind of give a wish list of what we want to see happen when a potential EOS R1 comes out, both for photo and video. But this is a bit of a tricky dynamic to navigate, and here's why. The Canon EOS R3, which I have right here, lovely little camera body, is actually quite expensive. I mean, this is about $5,800 roughly USD. You take a look at something like the Nikon Z9, which is a very well priced $5,500 USD, and then you take a look at something like the Sony A1, which would be the other flagship camera in the lineup, which is quite expensive actually, just under $6,500 USD. So here's where it gets challenging, okay? Because a more reasonable part of me wants to say something like the Canon EOS R3 is quite a niche camera, really sports and wildlife, not very versatile, and I'd really want to see that price come down. I feel it's too expensive. So then maybe the R1 comes out, pushes the R3 price down, and the R1 makes just a few key changes that are important, but largely stays the same as the R3 body. That way we can keep the price fairly competitive against the A1 and the Z9. But then another part of me is like, well, what if we just go crazy with this camera? I mean, yes, it's going to be expensive, but then make it worth the extra cost and just go crazy on the wish list. I think that's the way that Jordan and I are going to go, but we have to keep in mind this challenge of what's going to be realistic. One thing cannot be disputed. This camera needs to have a brand new and very exciting stacked sensor, so let's talk about that first. So for our sensor talk, we found a background which is reminiscent of the surface of your sensor, so here we go. The sensor is going to be the critical thing here, and you know, Canon have actually done a lot of work in recent years to make their sensors have better image quality, dynamic range, that kind of stuff. So that's been very positive, but the key thing here now, especially on a flagship camera, it has to have a very fast readout speed. It's got to scan quickly. And the problem here is if you look at the EOS R3 sensor, it is the slowest of the three sensors we're talking about between the A1, the Z9, and then the R3. Marginally so, but let's also keep in mind that it's dramatically lower megapixels. The more megapixels you add, the harder it gets to maintain a fast scan speed. And this scan speed is exactly what we need in a flagship camera because it unlocks so much potential. We've seen this with the A1, we've seen this with the Z9. So I feel like the R1 is going to have to at least compete on an even field. It's going to have to be 45 to 50-ish megapixels. Ideally, I'd like to see it push 60. And it's gonna have to be at least as fast, if not faster, to really make a big impression in this game. If it can't pull that off, it's just not gonna compete as a flagship. So let's talk about body design next. And if there's anything I don't want to see change from the EOS R3, it's the excellent body design. I love this thing. I far prefer the size of it to a bulkier Z9. I don't even mind the integrated vertical grip. Normally I don't like those, but it still is quite small and compact. Battery in here is excellent. Battery life is great. That doesn't really need to change. What I do want to see different though, first off, we need twin CF Express Type B slots. No more of this one CF Express and one SD card slot in a flagship. The other thing we need to see, HDMI port. It should be a full size, not a micro. I know there's not a ton of space, but we got to find that somewhere. So you know what would bring Jordan and I a lot of joy is changes to the EVF and back panel display. Let's talk about that next. So first off, the back panel. I mean, we both like the fully articulating panel for video work. It's great, but I know that a lot of photographers are divided on this. They don't like the fact that it's sticking off the side. They want something a little bit more compact, you know, less likely to get caught on something. So we'd like to see a screen where Canon just steals what like the Sony A7R5 has, you know, something that can fully articulate but also tilt. I mean, that's a really nice way to please both cameras. stamps when it comes to what the best back panel is going to be like. Okay, so let's talk about the EVF next. Now, part of me says, well, we should just keep the same one as the EOS R3. I love this EVF. 5.76 million dots is plenty. I love the 120 frame per second refresh rate. There's no lag. It's great for sports and action shooting, but also it's an HDR OLED display, and so Canon debuted their OVF, optical viewfinder simulation mode here, where it does show you the tonal range that you would see with your own eyes. So to save cost and keep the same unit going would be fine. Or if we're gonna go wild, give us something like the 9 million dot EVFs that we're seeing in the Sony A1, but make it so that it doesn't drop in resolution when you're actually autofocusing. If you can give us that kind of substantial benefit with no downside, we still keep the lack of lag, that would be ideal. But you know what brought me the most joy with the Canon EOS R3? It was the eye control follow focus, where I could look with my eye and the focus point would adjust accordingly. It worked great for me. What we need to see on the EOS R1 is that it works great for everybody else as well, because it seems to be a mixed bag on whether it's going to calibrate properly with your eye or not. Get that squared away, and I think a lot of people appreciate this very innovative new focusing technique. Okay, let's talk about the shutter next, or maybe the lack of shutter might be a good option too. I mean, if the sensor scans fast enough, the EOS R1 could do something very similar to the Z9, but what I'd really like to see would be a still combination of mechanical and electronic shutter, much like the Sony A1 does. If we could have our cake and eat it too, a mechanical shutter that allowed flash syncs up to, 500th of a second around there, that would be really great. But if it's a fast scanning enough sensor and we don't need a shutter mechanism, that's a good option too. So the last thing that I want to see happen with the Canon EOS R1 is really more of a pie-in-the-sky hope or dream, maybe, more than anything else, but I want to see Canon crack this computational photography code in a full-frame sensor. We still haven't seen any of the major manufacturers do that with a sensor this size, and we really did kind of touch on this with the Sony A1, how it is possible because these sensors are getting fast enough to do these multi-shot capabilities. In fact, first off, it'd be nice to see the Canon EOS R1 just do multi-shot high-res mode in the first place, but also, go beyond HDR, give us better astrophotography, give us live ND options like Olympus and Home System have been doing. I think that we're at a point now where if a camera can really start to incorporate more of these multi-shot combination photos to improve image quality and give you capabilities you don't normally have, that'll be a big step forward.
All right, Jordan here to talk about what I'd like to see for video in the R1. And first of all, we're assuming that this is a stacked high-res sensor, so I want it to have 8K, but also because that sensor should be fast enough to read out the whole thing in 14-bit recording video, I want the C-Log 2 profile. I really find C-Log 3 very limiting, difficult to work with, and sure, I know on a lot of the Canons we can record internal RAW with them, but I really want the C-Log 2 functionality for when you're recording compressed 10-bit recording, so it doesn't take up as much space on the card. Now, another huge thing I'd like to see introduced with the Canon R1 is a brand new video interface. I mean, if you're shooting video on their mirrorless cameras, interface is just riddled with embarrassing things like the histogram disappearing when you hit record, or the level disappearing, or if you switch out of slow-mo, it chooses just arbitrary frame rates and resolutions. None of it makes any sense. Now, I'd say, just like the Canon R5C, they should use the professional video interface, but that's incredibly clunky and confusing as well. So give us a brand new, streamlined, video-centric interface. That's going to make me happy. Now the next thing should be something that's really simple to implement, and we should have already seen it on the R3, is you've got this wonderful eye control system where you can look at something to select it for tracking. Let that work in video recording as well. It would be so much more intuitive than taking my eye off the EVF and tapping the touch screen. That just feels clunky. One last thing we got to talk about is overheating. And whenever I bring this up, we get a whole bunch of photographers saying, like, don't put a fan on my photo camera. But I think Canon should take a page from Fujifilm's playbook and have an optional fan accessory that you could attach to it. So if you really need long record times or very high frame rate demanding video modes, you don't have to worry about overheating, but it's not making the body any bigger and clunkier.
So as always, some very astute observations from Jordan in the video department.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean most of what I just said there. So that leaves us to our conclusion. I mean, what does Canon have to do here? Again, we talked about at the start of this video that maybe they go more of a reasonable route. Reuse the EOS R3 body, put a new sensor in it that has to be done, and then just, try to price it aggressively to compete with the Nikon Z9 and the Nikon Z8, or Do we then maybe go the more optimistic route and say, you know what Canon can do? Make an expensive camera, make a $7,000 plus camera, but make it such a technological achievement that it really does bring Canon back to the forefront of being a powerful technical innovator. I could really see Canon wanting to make a big play for just those glory days of the earlier 1D digital flagship bodies where they really were seen as technical masters. But we are all waiting in an eager anticipation to see what they do come out with. We don't know when, but it's gotta be soon, and I, for one, cannot wait to find out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and you have the same excitement for it. Let me know in the comments below what you think Canon should do with the R1. We'd absolutely love to have that feedback. Check out our socials. Please do like and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to check out our podcast. You can watch it here on the same channel or search for the PetaPixel podcast on all your favorite podcast listening apps. We're as good on video as we are just while you're driving your car or doing your laundry. Okay, well, I don't need to move on because we're done. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.